The dog first appeared 3 minutes before midnight. Mara Keene noticed him through the fogged front window of the Bellmere Transit Motel while wiping cold coffee stains from the counter with a gray rag that smelled faintly like bleach and cigarettes. Outside, the highway looked drowned. Rainwater shimmered beneath the buzzing motel sign. A freight train moaned somewhere beyond the ridgeline, low and distant enough to sound almost underwater. The dog sat motionless beside the abandoned bus shelter across the road, not pacing, not barking, just waiting. A rust-colored shepherd mixed with wet fur darkened by rain. Every few seconds, he looked toward the curve of Route 16, disappearing into the trees, then back toward the shelter, then the road again, like he expected headlights. Mara watched him for nearly a minute before speaking. Poor thing. The old radio behind the desk crackled with a faded country song from another decade. Somewhere upstairs, pipes groaned inside the motel walls. The dog never moved. Around 1 in the morning, she stepped outside with half a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Cold rain immediately soaked through her sleeves. The dog looked at her once, not frightened, not friendly, just tired. "You hungry?" she asked. He stayed beside the shelter. Mara crouched slowly and slid the sandwich onto the wet concrete. The dog approached only after she backed away. He ate carefully, quietly. Then he returned to the exact same spot beside the bench, watching the road. By sunrise, he was gone. The next night, he returned, exactly 3 minutes before midnight. And that was when Mara started paying attention. Bellmere Crossing wasn't really a town anymore. It used to be, back when the copper mill still operated beyond the Blackstone River, and freight buses carried workers between Hollow County and the mountain rail depots. Now most buildings sat dark by sunset. The old movie theater had plywood nailed across the entrance. Half the storefronts along Mercer Street stood empty behind dusty glass. People passed through Bellmere. They didn't stay. Mara had been staying for 6 years, long enough for everyone to stop asking why, long enough for loneliness to become routine. She worked nights at the motel because insomnia made daytime jobs impossible after the divorce. The Bellmere Transit Motel mostly rented rooms to exhausted truckers, seasonal laborers, and people who avoided questions. The owner, Frank Dolan, slept upstairs with a television, running 24 hours a day, and rarely came down unless someone broke something. Mara liked the silence. At least she told herself she did. By the 4th night, the dog's routine never changed. 11:57 p.m. He emerged from somewhere beyond the tree line near the river road. He crossed Route 16 carefully, then sat beside the abandoned bus shelter, always facing north, always waiting. At exactly 1:14 a.m. he stood, walked toward the old rail bridge beyond town, and disappeared into the fog. Every night, same pattern, same timing. Mara started leaving scraps of food near the shelter. Sometimes canned beef, sometimes leftover fries, sometimes plain chicken from the diner next door. The dog accepted the food but never allowed her close enough to touch him. One freezing Thursday night, a truck driver named Leon noticed Mara staring through the window. "What's got you hypnotized?" he asked. She nodded toward the shelter. "There's a dog keeps showing up." Leon glanced outside. His expression shifted strangely. Not fear exactly. Recognition. "Huh," he muttered. "You know him?" The trucker hesitated too long. "People around here call him Ranger." "Who owns him?" Leon rubbed his jaw. "No one now." Then he grabbed his room key and walked upstairs before she could ask anything else. That answer bothered her more than it should have. The next evening, Mara drove to Wilker's Diner before her shift. The diner sat beside the old fuel station near Mercer Street, glowing weakly beneath flickering yellow lights. Inside smelled like burnt bacon grease and wet coats. Clara Wilker poured coffee without asking. "You look tired. Couldn't sleep." "You never do." Mara wrapped cold fingers around the mug. "You know a dog people call Ranger?" The question landed heavier than expected. Clara stopped wiping the counter. For a second, the diner seemed quieter. Even the kitchen noise faded. "Where'd you hear that?" "He's been hanging around the motel." Clara looked toward the rain-streaked windows. "That dog's been around a long time." "How long?" The waitress shrugged. shrugged. Long enough? That doesn't answer anything. Clara finally sighed. There used to be a driver came through town years ago. Night route between Dunley Ridge and Hollow County. What happened to him? Road accident. Was the dog his? I don't know, but the way she said it sounded rehearsed. Mara noticed that. People in Bellmere had a habit of answering questions halfway. Like the town itself avoided certain memories. That night, the dog arrived earlier than usual. Rain hammered the highway so hard the world beyond the motel sign blurred into silver static. The dog sat beneath the shelter while water pooled around his paws. Mara grabbed an old blanket from the laundry room and crossed the road. "Hey," she whispered. The dog watched her carefully. Up close, he looked older than she first thought. Gray spread along his muzzle. A torn scar crossed one ear. His ribs showed faintly beneath wet fur. Mara slowly laid the blanket beneath the shelter bench. The dog stared at it, then at her. For one strange moment, she had the uncomfortable feeling he was studying her rather than the other way around. Then headlights appeared around the northern bend. The dog instantly stood, alert, focused. A pickup truck passed. Nothing more. The dog sat again. The disappointment in that movement hit Mara harder than expected, like watching someone realize a miracle wasn't coming. At 1:14, the dog rose and began walking toward the rail bridge. This time, Mara followed. The old bridge stretched over Blackstone River half a mile beyond town. Rust covered the support beams. Most people avoided it after dark, because teenagers used to jump from it before the county sealed the lower access road. Fog drifted above the river water. The dog crossed beneath the bridge toward an abandoned maintenance shack, nearly swallowed by weeds. Mara kept her distance. The shack door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Inside, the dog curled beside something hidden beneath old tarps. Mara stepped closer. A battered blue duffel bag, a thermos, an ancient bus schedule laminated years ago, and a faded photograph. She picked it up carefully. A man stood beside an interstate bus during winter snowfall. Tall, dark beard, heavy coat. Beside him sat the same dog, younger, healthy. Written across the bottom in black marker, Eli and Ranger, Route 16. The sound of metal clanging overhead made Mara jump. A freight train thundered across the bridge. The dog immediately growled. Not threatening. Warning. Mara slowly set the photo back down. "Okay," she whispered. The dog watched until she backed away into the fog. That was the first night she dreamed about him. In the dream, the bus shelter stood empty beneath snowfall. The dog waited alone while headlights approached through the storm. But before the vehicle reached him, Mara always woke up. 3 days later, she visited the Bellmere Library. Calling it a library felt generous. The building was barely larger than a dentist office. Most shelves sat half empty. An elderly man named Walter managed the place while listening to baseball games through headphones. "You got newspaper archives?" Mara asked. Walter blinked slowly. "Depends how far back. Maybe 10 years. That machine barely survives 5. She explained she was looking for a bus accident. Walter removed his headphones. "Which one?" That answer chilled her. "There was more than one?" Walter studied her for a moment. "You talking about Eli Mercer?" Mara nodded. The old man leaned back slowly. "Haven't heard that name in years. What happened?" Walter hesitated. "Storm wreck out near Hollow Pass. Bus went through ice barrier during a blizzard. People died? 3 confirmed." "Confirmed?" Walter scratched his chin. "Bus burned before recovery teams reached it." Mara felt a strange heaviness settle inside her chest. "And the dog?" "Nobody could catch him after." Walter walked toward a storage room and returned with a brittle newspaper clipping. January 18, night transit. Crash claims 3. Beneath the headline sat a grainy photograph of emergency. Crews beside frozen wreckage. Mara scanned the article. Driver identified as Elijah Mercer, 41. Survived by no immediate family. Witnesses reported severe weather conditions. Possible brake failure under investigation. Then a smaller paragraph near the bottom. Locals continue reporting sightings of Mercer's dog near Route 16. That's it? Mara asked. Walter nodded. Town moved on, but she noticed another detail. The article had been cut strangely, like part of it was missing. Was there another page? Walter's expression changed. Probably. You don't sound sure. The old man carefully folded the clipping. Some things disappear around here. Before Mara could ask more, Walter slipped his headphones back on. Conversation over. That night, the dog waited beneath the shelter while snow drifted across the highway. The first snowfall of winter. Mara brought beef stew in a paper bowl. The dog ate slowly. You belong to Eli, huh? She murmured. At the sound of the name, the dog looked toward the northern road again. That reaction lingered with her. Not excitement. Recognition, as if the name itself still mattered. A sheriff deputy named Colin Voss entered the motel around midnight for coffee. Mara asked him about the accident. Voss stared at her too long before answering. Why? Just curious. People get curious about bad things after enough years pass. That mean you remember it? I was there. The deputy removed his gloves slowly. Road conditions were awful. What caused the crash? That's the official answer. Mara frowned. What does that mean? Voss glanced toward the window where the dog sat beyond falling snow. Means Bellmere buried a lot of things during those years. Like what? The deputy lowered his voice. Copper mill shut down around then. Town was collapsing. People lost jobs. Folks were desperate. That still doesn't explain the accident. Voss didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, Eli Mercer wasn't exactly loved around here. Why? He reported things. What things? Fuel theft, missing cargo, drivers smuggling equipment through the county lines. Mara felt her stomach tighten. And people blamed him? Some did. The deputy finished his coffee. Some people figured the crash wasn't entirely bad luck. Before leaving, Voss stopped at the door. That dog still waits every night? Yeah. The deputy nodded once. Then maybe he knows something none of us ever did. The door closed behind him. Outside, snow continued falling around the lonely shelter. Mara barely slept the next week. The mystery settled inside her mind like splinters. She began timing the dog's movements, tracking where he disappeared, noticing details. Some nights, he paused beside the old rail crossing before heading toward the bridge. Other nights, he sniffed the frozen ditch beside Route 16. Once around 12:40 a.m., he suddenly barked toward the woods behind the shelter. Not random barking. Aggressive. A warning. Mara stepped outside. The trees stood motionless in moonlit fog. Nothing there. Yet the dog refused to calm down for several minutes. The following afternoon, Mara drove north along Route 16 toward Hollow Pass. The road twisted through dense pine forests and abandoned industrial lots dusted with snow. About 20 miles beyond Bellmere, she found the crash site, or what remained of it. A bent guardrail overlooked a steep frozen ravine. Someone had tied faded ribbons around a nearby pine tree years ago. Most had disintegrated. Mara stood beside the road while wind hissed through the valley. The place felt wrong, not haunted, just unfinished, as if something important had never fully left. Near the edge of the ravine, she noticed fresh paw prints. Large, recent. The dog had been there. She followed the tracks downward carefully. Halfway down the slope, buried beneath snow and dead branches, something metallic reflected sunlight. A bus emblem. Bellmere transit lines. The wreckage remained hidden below the trees. No cleanup, no memorial. Just rusting fragments swallowed by the mountain. Mara suddenly understood why nobody discussed it. The town wanted the accident erased. Then she noticed another detail, scratched into the side of one burned metal panel. Not an accident. The letters looked old, uneven, possibly carved with a knife. Mara stared at the words while cold wind moved through the ravine. Something shifted behind her. She spun. Nothing. Only trees, but the feeling of being watched followed her all the way back to Bellmere. That night, Ranger arrived limping. A fresh cut crossed one front paw. Jesus, Mara whispered. She brought a first aid kit from the motel office. The dog resisted at first, then finally allowed her close enough to wrap the wound. His fur smelled like snow and river water. You keep going back there, don't you? She murmured. The dog remained still while she tied the bandage. For the first time, he leaned slightly into her hand, a tiny movement, but it felt enormous. Mara sat beside him beneath the shelter, while snow drifted through the highway lights. Neither moved for several minutes. Then she quietly asked, "What happened to him?" The dog stared toward the road, waiting. Always waiting. 2 nights later, Mara received her first direct warning. She found a folded note beneath the motel desk. Leave the past alone. No signature. No explanation. Just those words. She showed Deputy Voss the next morning. He read it twice. You tell anybody about the ravine? Just you. Voss sighed heavily. There were rumors after the crash about stolen equipment. Missing manifests. Who was involved? Nobody ever proved anything. That's not what I asked. The deputy looked exhausted suddenly. Bellmere used to survive because people ignored certain things. What things? Smuggling. Scrap theft. Illegal transport runs through the mountain roads. And Eli reported it? That's what some believed. Then somebody killed him. Voss didn't answer. That silence answered enough. The next week, Mara became obsessed. She searched old records, asked questions, drove routes Eli once worked. Slowly, fragments emerged. Eli Mercer had been quiet, reliable, former army mechanic, lived alone in a trailer near Blackstone River. No wife, no children, only the dog. People described him the same way. He noticed things. Nobody said it kindly. At Wilker's diner, Clara finally admitted more. There was a storm the night he died, she said softly while stacking coffee cups. Worst winter storm Bellmere had seen in years. And? Eli stopped here before his route. Seemed nervous. Nervous about what? He asked if anybody had been looking for him. Mara frowned. Did someone threaten him? Clara looked away. I think he knew something bad was coming. Why didn't anyone help him? The waitress gave a sad laugh. Help him? Outside, wind rattled the diner windows. Back then, people around here were too busy surviving themselves. That answer haunted Mara the rest of the night. The dog arrived late, 12:21 a.m. First time his routine ever changed. He looked agitated. Wet snow clung to his fur. Instead of sitting beneath the shelter, he paced along the roadside repeatedly, then suddenly ran north. Mara followed in her truck. The dog led her beyond the rail bridge toward an abandoned maintenance road, disappearing into dense woods. Half a mile in, she spotted another vehicle parked beneath dead pines. An old white pickup, empty. The dog barked furiously toward a collapsed storage shed nearby. Mara stepped out cautiously. Inside the shed, half buried beneath debris, sat several rusted metal crates, stamped with old copper mill inventory numbers. Smuggled cargo, or what remained of it. Then headlights suddenly appeared behind her. Mara spun around. Deputy Voss stepped from his cruiser. You shouldn't be here. You followed me? I followed the dog. Snow drifted sideways through the trees. Mara pointed toward the crates. This is what Eli found, isn't it? Voss looked grim. Part of it. What really happened? The deputy removed his hat slowly. For years, drivers moved stolen equipment through the mountain roads after midnight. County inspectors got paid off. Town officials ignored it. And Eli? He reported one shipment. What shipment? Voss hesitated. Industrial solvents, illegal disposal stuff, dangerous chemicals. Mara felt cold spread through her stomach. He threatened somebody's money. Yeah. Did they sabotage the bus? Voss looked toward the woods. I don't know, but you think so. The deputy finally nodded. There were brake line cuts investigators never officially explained. Mara stared at him. And nobody did anything? Bellmere was dying. People protected themselves. The dog suddenly growled toward the darkness beyond the trees. Voss turned sharply. Somewhere deeper in the woods, an engine started. A vehicle sped away through the snow. The deputy cursed under his breath. Someone's been watching too, Mara whispered. Voss looked at her. That note wasn't a joke. The next morning, Mara found the maintenance shack near the bridge destroyed. The blue duffel bag was gone. The photograph missing. Someone had searched the place during the night. But one thing remained. Beneath loose floorboards, hidden under dirt and broken nails, a cassette tape, old, dust-covered. Mara brought it back to the motel. Frank kept an ancient cassette player in the office storage closet. The tape crackled heavily when she pressed play. For several seconds, only static. Then a man's voice, tired, breathing hard. Ellie, if somebody finds this. Static interrupted him. Don't know who to trust anymore. A loud bang echoed in the background. I reported the cargo manifests to county transit. Somebody leaked it. More static. They followed me tonight. Mara's pulse quickened. If anything happens, the recording distorted again. Then clearer. Take care of Ranger. Silence. Then the tape ended. Mara sat frozen. Outside, evening fog swallowed the highway. The dog appeared beneath the shelter exactly at 11:57, waiting, like always. But now the waiting felt unbearable, not because he expected Eli to return, because some part of him never understood why he hadn't. 3 nights later, Bellmere lost power during a snowstorm. The entire town disappeared into darkness except for scattered emergency lights glowing through fog. Mara lit candles inside the motel lobby. Around midnight, the dog never appeared. For the first time in weeks, anxiety crawled through her chest. At 12:30, she grabbed her coat and drove toward the bridge. Snow hammered the windshield. Visibility nearly vanished, and she saw him. The dog stood in the middle of Route 16, not moving. Headlights illuminated falling snow around him like drifting ash. Mara stopped the truck. The dog barked sharply, then ran north. She followed, past the bridge, past the maintenance road, toward Hollow Pass. The storm worsened as they climbed the mountain highway. Finally, the dog stopped near the old crash site. Mara stepped out into violent wind. "What is it?" The dog moved toward the ravine edge, then looked back at her. Below, partially exposed by shifting snow, something protruded from the frozen wreckage. A metal lockbox. Mara climbed down carefully. Inside the box sat paperwork sealed in plastic. Shipping manifests, names, county signatures, evidence, enough to expose everything. Eli had hidden it before the crash, or during it. Then Mara noticed another document, a handwritten letter, addressed simply, "If Ranger brings someone here." Her breath caught. Hands trembling, she unfolded the paper. "I kept thinking somebody decent would eventually ask questions. Maybe that's stupid. Maybe towns like Bellmere survive because people stop asking. If you're reading this, it means Ranger stayed longer than I did. Take the evidence to someone outside Hollow County. Don't trust local officials. And if the dog's still alive, tell him I tried to come back." Mara closed her eyes. Snow whipped across the ravine. The dog stood beside the wreckage silently, waiting, even now. Then headlights appeared above. Another vehicle. "Fast!" Deputy Voss shouted from the road. "Mara, move!" A truck barreled toward the guardrail. Too fast for the storm. Intentional. The vehicle smashed through ice near the roadside edge. Mara stumbled backward as metal screamed against rock. The truck slid partially into the ravine before stopping crookedly. A man climbed out holding a flashlight. Harold Beck, former transit supervisor. Mara recognized him from old newspaper photographs. "You should have left this alone," he yelled through the storm. Deputy Voss aimed his weapon. "Drop it, Harold!" Beck laughed bitterly. "You think any of this mattered? Town was starving. You sabotaged the bus?" Mara shouted. Beck's silence answered first. Then finally, "We only meant to scare him." Wind roared through the ravine. He wouldn't stop talking, wouldn't stop reporting things. Mara stared at him in horror. "You killed people." Beck shook his head violently. "The storm killed them," but even he sounded unconvinced. Then the dog growled. Low, deep. Beck turned sharply toward Ranger. For the first time, fear crossed the man's face. "Damn animal kept coming back," he muttered. Deputy Voss stepped closer. "It's over, Harold." Beck looked toward the wreckage below, then toward the endless storm surrounding the highway. "You know what Bellmere does to people?" he whispered. Nobody answered. The man slowly dropped the flashlight. By dawn, state police vehicles lined Hollow Pass. The manifests reached investigators outside the county. Within weeks, old corruption cases reopened. Names surfaced. Arrests followed. Bellmere suddenly remembered everything it spent years trying to forget. But the dog still returned to the shelter every night. That part never changed. Even after the truth, even after the confessions. Every evening at 11:57, Ranger crossed Route 16 and sat beneath the abandoned bus shelter, waiting. Mara stopped trying to stop him. Some routines survive grief longer than logic. Winter deepened around Bellmere. The town remained quiet, but something subtle shifted. People finally spoke Eli Mercer's name out loud again. Clara placed his photograph near the diner register. Walter restored the missing newspaper archives. Deputy Voss resigned 2 months later. Said the town needed someone cleaner than him. Mara understood what he meant. Guilt hangs differently on people who stayed silent. One evening in February, Mara visited Eli's abandoned trailer beside Blackstone River. County workers planned to demolish it by spring. Inside, dust coated everything. Stacks of route maps sat beside canned food and old radio equipment. The place felt frozen in time. Near the bedroom window, Mara found a small wooden box. Inside were dozens of photographs. Most showed highways, storms, bus stations, roadside diners, and the dog, always the dog, sleeping beneath bus seats, watching snow fall through windows, running beside frozen roads. Then Mara found one final picture. Eli standing beside Ranger outside the Bellmere shelter. Written on the back, "He waits for me after every route. Doesn't matter how late, always there." Mara sat quietly inside the empty trailer while river wind rattled the walls. That sentence broke something inside her. Not dramatically, not the way movies usually show grief. Just a quiet ache spreading slowly through her chest. Because suddenly she understood the terrible simplicity of it. The dog wasn't guarding secrets. He wasn't haunted. He wasn't waiting because he understood death. He was waiting because routine had become love, and love doesn't always understand disappearance, especially not the kind that never says goodbye. That night, Mara brought an old flannel blanket to the shelter. The dog watched her place it beneath the bench. Snowflakes drifted through the orange highway lights. "You know," she said softly, "he really did try to come back." The dog looked toward the northern road. A long silence passed. Then slowly he lay down beside the blanket. First time she'd ever seen him rest there. A freight train echoed somewhere beyond the river. Mara sat beside him. Cold air burned her lungs. Cars occasionally passed through the darkness, spraying slush across the highway. Each time headlights appeared, the dog lifted his head, then lowered it again. Hours passed. Neither moved much. For once, the waiting no longer felt mysterious, only sad and human somehow. In March, thawing snow exposed old scars across Bellmere. Flooded ditches, collapsed fences, rust beneath everything. The bus shelter still stood beside Route 16, though county officials discussed removing it. Nobody used it anymore. Mara argued against demolition harder than expected. Eventually, the county left it alone. One rainy evening, Clara asked her why. Mara looked through the diner window toward the highway. "Some places matter because somebody remembers them." Clara nodded quietly, like she understood. Ranger grew weaker as spring approached. His movements slowed. The limp worsened. Some nights he arrived late. Other nights he barely ate. Mara brought him medicine hidden inside hamburger meat. Sometimes he accepted it, sometimes not. But he always returned to the shelter. Always looked north. One April night, heavy fog swallowed Bellmere completely. The motel sign glowed faintly like a dying lighthouse. Mara stepped outside with coffee steaming between her hands. The shelter stood empty. No dog, she waited. 11:57 came and passed, then midnight, then 12:30. Rain tapped softly against the pavement. A strange dread settled inside her. Finally, she grabbed her keys and drove toward the bridge. Fog wrapped around the truck headlights in pale waves. Near the maintenance shack ruins, she spotted him. Ranger lay beside the riverbank beneath the bridge, still alive, barely. Mara knelt beside him immediately. "Hey," she whispered. The dog lifted his head weakly. River water moved slowly beneath rusted steel overhead. The old freight line groaned somewhere in the darkness. Mara wrapped the blanket around him. "It's okay." His breathing sounded shallow, tired, like something winding down after a very long journey. Then, unexpectedly, the dog looked toward the highway one final time, waiting. Even now, Mara felt tears burn her eyes for the first time since the divorce years earlier. Not loud tears, just silent ones sliding down cold skin, because there was something unbearable about devotion lasting beyond reason. The dog rested his head against the blanket. Rain whispered across the river, and slowly, quietly, Ranger stopped breathing. No dramatic moment, no cinematic miracle, only silence. The kind that arrives after years of waiting finally end. For a long time, Mara stayed beside him beneath the bridge, listening to distant trains, listening to river water, listening to the empty dark beyond Bellmere. By sunrise, Fog drifted through the valley in pale silver ribbons. Deputy Voss helped bury the dog beside the river overlooking Route 16. No speeches, no crowd, just wet earth, cold wind, and quiet. Mara placed Eli's photograph beneath the stones. Eli and Ranger, Route 16. Weeks later, travelers passing through Bellmere occasionally noticed something strange beside the abandoned bus shelter. Fresh flowers, sometimes coffee left in paper cups, sometimes old dog treats. Nobody admitted leaving them, but the offerings kept appearing, like the town finally learned how to remember. Summer eventually reached Hollow County. Rainstorms softened. Grass reclaimed the roadside edges. Life moved forward the way it always does. Slowly, reluctantly, without asking permission. Mara still worked nights at the Bellmere Transit Motel. The insomnia never fully disappeared, neither did the loneliness, but certain silences felt different now, less empty. Sometimes around midnight, she still looked automatically toward the shelter, expecting to see the rust-colored shape beneath the flickering light. And sometimes, just for a second, she almost could. Not as a ghost, not as something supernatural, just memory. Strong enough to feel physical. One late August evening, a young traveler stopped at the motel during heavy rain. While checking in, he glanced through the lobby window. "What's that old bus stop for?" he asked. Mara looked toward the shelter glowing softly beside the empty highway. The rain blurred everything beyond it. For a moment, she could almost hear distant freight trains again. Almost see snow drifting across winter roads. Almost imagine a tired driver somewhere out there trying to get home. She smiled faintly. "Someone used to wait there every night," she said. The traveler nodded absently, but Mara kept staring through the rain long after he walked upstairs. Outside, Route 16 disappeared into darkness beyond Bellmere Crossing. Empty road, wet pavement, fading slowly into silence, flickering lights, and beneath the quiet shelter beside the highway, the blanket Mara once left there still rested folded neatly beneath the bench, waiting. Like some promises never completely leave the places they belonged. And somewhere beyond the mountains, another freight train echoed through the night, long, lonely, fading slowly into silence.